are both now reporting that Michael Jackson has died.
Michael Jackson, the king of pop, unexpectedly died.
There are things the world is not prepared to find. Not because the truth is impossible, but because some names carry so much myth, so much grief, so much unfinished business, that but you cannot understand what was in that tomb without first understanding what was buried there. Not just a body. Not just a name. Something far more complicated. Far more human. Far more heartbreaking than anything the world had been told. This is that story. Gary, Indiana. A 2-bedroom house. 12 people living inside walls thin enough to hear every argument, every prayer, every quiet moment of desperation. No safety net. No inheritance. No plan B. Just a father with cold, unshakable ambition, and sons who had no choice but to carry it. Joe Jackson was a man failure had hardened into something else entirely. He had his own dreams once. A guitar. A band. A way out of Gary, Indiana, and everything Gary represented. That way never came. So he looked at his children and made a decision, quiet, cold, and permanent, that would echo through every one of their lives like a crack running through stone. Their gifts would not be wasted. Whatever the cost. Whatever it took. Whatever pieces of childhood had to be broken to get there. Michael was 8 years old when the rehearsals became something no child should ever endure. Belt in hand. Hour after hour after hour. A wrong note meant immediate punishment. A misstep meant the same. No warmth waiting on the other side. No reassurance that the punishment was finished and the love had returned. Just the standard. And if the standard wasn't met, consequences. Clean and cold and absolute. Night after night in a house that smelled like dinner and sweat, and the particular quiet desperation of a family betting everything on children who never asked to carry that weight. What Joe Jackson built was two things at once. A performer of almost impossible precision and discipline. And a boy who would spend the next 50 years of his life unable to believe, truly believe, in the deep place where belief actually lives, that anything he ever achieved was enough. The terror never left him. Not at 9 years old, performing at the Apollo Theater while other boys his age were riding bikes and staying up past bedtime for no reason at all. Not when Thriller was selling 60 million copies and his face was on every television screen on Earth. Not in the final weeks of his life, a 50-year-old man pushing a failing body through rehearsals that should have been medically impossible, because the engine Joe built in that tiny house in Gary, Indiana never once learned how to stop. Never received the instruction. Never heard the words that might have given it permission to slow down. But then there was the stage. And on the stage, something happened that no one had designed, no one had installed, no one could take credit for. Something that had always existed inside him and had simply been waiting, patiently, powerfully, for a place large enough to live in. He became free. The fear disappeared the moment the lights hit him. The watchfulness evaporated. Something took over, something uncoachable, unteachable, impossible to fully explain even by the people who spent their careers studying exactly this kind of thing, and the audience felt it every single time. Without exception. From the very first performance to the very last rehearsal before everything ended. The moment Michael Jackson stepped in front of people, something fundamental in the room shifted. Industry veterans who had seen everything put down what they were holding and stared. Choreographers who had worked with the greatest performers of their generation said, quietly and with complete seriousness, that they had never encountered anything like it. This wasn't talent. Talent is common. The world is full of talented people who never change anything. This was something else entirely. The Jackson 5 rose in a way the music industry hadn't quite prepared itself for. I want you back. ABC. I'll be there. Michael was 11 years old, and the voice coming out of him had no business living in a child's body. Everyone who encountered him in those early years arrived at the same conclusion, walking through different doors, using different words. Whatever this was, it didn't come around often. Maybe it had never come around quite like this before. Maybe it would never come around like this again. But behind the matching outfits, behind the screaming audiences and the television appearances and the perfectly executed performances, the childhood was already gone. Completely. Irreversibly. Handed first to his father without being asked. Then to Motown. Then to the vast and indifferent machine of global celebrity that takes everything personal, everything tender, everything that makes a human being feel like a human being, and converts it, without hesitation, into product, into fuel, into content for a world with an appetite that never reaches satisfaction. He said for the rest of his life that he never had a real childhood. He said it quietly. He said it with pain that anyone paying attention could hear clearly beneath the words. He said it across 4 decades of interviews, in different countries, in different languages, until the world, exhausted by hearing it, uncomfortable with what hearing it truly meant, filed it away as eccentricity, as the complaint of a man who had more than any human being could reasonably need.
That dismissal was its own form of cruelty. It was the most honest thing Michael Jackson ever said about himself. And the world's failure to truly hear it was a failure that would take a very long time to quietly reckon with. Then came 1982. Thriller. 66 million copies. 8 Grammys in a single night. A music video that was not a music video at all. It was a 14-minute cinematic event that rewrote, permanently and completely, what popular culture was allowed to be and what it was allowed to demand of itself. And then 1983. The Motown 25th Anniversary Special. A single moment. A single impossible, gravity-defying, backward slide across a television stage, and the world held its breath and never fully exhaled again. He was the most famous human being on earth. The most recognizable face. The most played voice. And by every honest account from every person who was actually close to him, he was completely and profoundly alone inside all of it. The fame was a wall as much as a platform. It kept everything out. Including the ordinary human connections that make a life feel livable. Including the simple things most people never think to be grateful for, the ability to walk into a room without the room changing, to be known without being watched, to rest without someone deciding what that rest meant. The vitiligo spread across his skin in patches the disease controlled. The lupus weakened him in ways he rarely spoke about publicly. His appearance changed, driven by illness, managed by medicine and makeup and the particular exhaustion of a man trying to maintain control over the one thing the world wouldn't stop discussing, and the world, entirely unwilling to accept the medical reality that doctors confirmed, built its own narrative. A narrative that had nothing to do with disease and everything to do with the insatiable hunger that attaches itself to extraordinary fame and refuses to be satisfied with anything as mundane as the truth. Michael stopped being a person in the public imagination. He became a projection screen. Whatever the world needed him to represent, genius, tragedy, guilt, strangeness, danger, innocence, it placed there. And the actual man disappeared further behind the image with every passing year, until the image was all most people could see, and the man behind it became invisible by degrees. Then 1993 arrived like a demolition charge placed at the precise foundation of everything he had spent his entire life constructing. A civil lawsuit. Global headlines that moved at a speed even that era couldn't fully contain. A reported settlement that the world read as confession, regardless of what the legal language actually stated, regardless of what the terms actually meant. And then 2005. A criminal trial the entire world watched. 14 counts. A jury that deliberated, returned, and said not guilty. 14 separate times. 14. The world shrugged. Moved to the next story. The damage was already permanent. The man who had made Thriller, who had changed popular culture so fundamentally that the world before and after him are genuinely different places, was now defined in the popular imagination by accusations that a jury had formally, completely, and unambiguously rejected. He left America. Moved through Bahrain. Then Ireland. Then Las Vegas. A king in exile from a kingdom that had consumed him whole, trying to give his 3 children something that resembled a normal life while living a life that had not been normal for a single day since he was 5 years old. Then 2009. This is it. 50 concerts. The O2 Arena in London. The announcement that the King of Pop was returning to the stage. The tickets disappeared in 4 hours. Millions of people across the world proving, in one frenzied morning of purchasing, that they had never stopped waiting. Never stopped believing. Never truly, fully let him go. He rehearsed with the ferocity of a man settling a debt. Like someone who understood privately, in a place he didn't share with the people around him, that this was the last chance. The final opportunity to stand in front of the world and remind it of what he actually was. Beneath everything that had been written about him. Beneath everything that had been decided about him without his knowledge or consent or presence in the room. Those who watched him in those final weeks describe something that breaks the heart even now, years later, knowing how it ends. A 50-year-old body being driven past every reasonable limit. Pushed forward by a will that was forged in Gary, Indiana, in a house with thin walls and a father who never once said the words that might have made any difference, enough. You have done enough. You can rest now. But he was not sleeping. Conrad Murray was in that house every night, administering propofol, a surgical anesthetic used in operating theaters, not bedrooms. Not a sleep aid. Not a relaxant. A drug that requires monitoring equipment and emergency protocols that were entirely absent from that rented Los Angeles mansion. Murray understood precisely what he was administering. He did it anyway. Night after night. Because Michael could not sleep, and there was no one in that house with the authority or the courage to say the word that needed to be said. No. June 25, 2009. Thursday morning. The call came at 12:22 in the afternoon. Michael Jackson had been transported to UCLA Medical Center. 2 hours later, the second call. The one that stopped every clock on Earth simultaneously. He was 50 years old. He weighed 136 pounds. The grief was planetary in its scale and completely, rawly sincere in its depth. Candlelight vigils on 6 continents. Radio stations that played nothing else for days on end. People who had spent years mocking him standing in streets and living rooms and offices around the world, weeping openly, without quite understanding why, or understanding exactly why, and being entirely unable to stop. The world remembered, all at once and with a force that shocked even those who had never stopped believing, exactly who he was. Exactly what he had given. Exactly what it had cost him to give it. He was interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park on September 3, 2009. The Great Mausoleum. Holly Terrace. A private ceremony attended by fewer than 200 people. The crypt was sealed. And then the silence settled over that hillside in Glendale like something that had decided it was permanent. Armed guards. Surveillance cameras. Gates that opened for no one. By 2010, grief had begun curdling in some into something more desperate, messages scratched into marble, ink pressed into stone walls, flowers left in quantities that had to be cleared weekly. Security doubled. The rumors multiplied and grew wilder with every year that passed. The crypt was empty. The body had been cremated in secret. He had faked his own death and was living somewhere finally, permanently, completely beyond reach. 15 years passed. Then the seal broke. The decision came from inside the estate, a convergence of legal pressures, legacy disputes, and a family that had never fully agreed on how his memory should be preserved or his remains maintained. The opening was not announced to the public. No press. No cameras. A small number of estate representatives. Select family members. Non-disclosure agreements governing precisely what could and could not leave that room. They opened the marble door. The crypt was not empty. And here is where every theory, every rumor, every desperate story constructed across 15 years of silence, meets what was actually there. No conspiracy. No rewritten history. No dramatic secret that altered the facts of his death or changed the arc of his life. What they found was quieter than any of that. And far more devastating than any theory the internet ever produced. Letters. Written in Michael's own hand. Never sent. To people he had loved. To people who had wounded him in ways he never spoke about publicly. To his children, Paris, Prince, Blanket, written when they were still very small, in language that was careful and specific and threaded through with something unmistakable to anyone willing to read it honestly. A father who knew, privately and without telling anyone around him, that time was not guaranteed. That there were things that needed to be said before the window that was slowly closing shut entirely. Words he could not find a way to speak aloud to the people who needed to hear them most. And there was something else inside that crypt. A journal. His own account of the exile years. Bahrain. Ireland. Las Vegas. Written entirely in his own words, from his own perspective, without lawyers or publicists or the 5 decades of media narration that had told the world who Michael Jackson was and what Michael Jackson meant. The estate has confirmed the journal exists. It will not be published in full. The reason given is privacy. The reason understood by anyone paying attention is something considerably more complicated than that. His own words. His own truth. Sealed again behind marble and steel and the same careful silence that has surrounded his name since the morning the world stopped. The doors are closed. The guards have returned to their posts. The flowers continue to accumulate at the outer gates and are quietly moved by the same careful hands that have been moving them every single week for 15 years. Michael Jackson remains exactly what he has always been. From the moment a 5-year-old boy walked onto a stage in Gary, Indiana and felt, for the very first time in his short and already complicated life, that he was standing in the only place on earth where he was completely, entirely himself. A voice the world could not stop hearing. A story it cannot stop telling. The boy from Gary deserved better. Most people who loved his music felt that truth somewhere they couldn't quite name, even when they didn't have the words for it. In unsent letters and a sealed journal hidden inside a marble wall in the hills above Los Angeles, it is clear now that he felt it too. He always knew. He simply never found anyone willing to truly hear it in time.